Hey guys, in today's video I'm going to be touching on a topic that was recently touched upon by Peter Brook, another F1 YouTuber who I think deserves all the credit for this video idea because although it's a topic I've thought about in the past, I never considered making a video about it. I'll touch upon everything currently happening in Formula 1 that I think should be adapted, changed or removed entirely from our beloved sport if I was to become FIA president replacing Stefano Domenicali. And with that, let's get into the video. Starting with a topic that has come up lots since the start of the season with the Red Bull dominance, and that is the technical regulations. Many fans have speculated ways to curb the trend of teams being able to dominate for season after season, and we've seen ever since the technical regulations became tighter and tighter in the mid-90s in the pursuit of safety, cost and competition. Some have suggested radical changes like making F1 a spec series, but what do I, a small 18-year-old F1 YouTuber, think should be done? Firstly, a spec series solution isn't right. F1 has always been the pinnacle of technical innovation, or at least that's what it's meant to be, so that option is out of the window. I also think that while the cost cap has some benefits, such as allowing for smaller teams to get closer to the big ones, it restricts improvement and time gain if teams don't get the grasp of the best fundamental design concepts very quickly in the season. Also, these modern aerodynamic regulations aren't just bad for competition, they're bad for racing. Lumpy, heavy, bulbous cars that fall apart at the slightest contact and require DRS to make any interesting racing aren't the way forward. The first thing I would do is bin off DRS, but instead of just getting rid of it, I would replace it with a push-to-pass system similar to that seen in IndyCar. ERS systems that follow pre-planned boost patterns will be gone and all battery deployment will be controlled by the driver. Drivers will get 200 seconds of boost in every single race, worth 160 horsepower, and they can choose to use it whenever they please. Do they burn it all in the first few laps to try and gain track position, or do they use it sporadically throughout the race waiting for a late safety car to bunch the field so they can capitalise on slower cars in front? It's basically like KERS from the early 2010s, except there's a lot more of it and it doesn't replenish every single lap. This feature eliminates the main criticism of DRS, that it's either not powerful enough or far too powerful at many tracks, but this won't happen with the boost system, as drivers won't waste energy pulling clear of the driver behind. They'll only use as much energy as is required to pass. Another feature will be taken this time from Formula E, whereby in that series the car's remaining battery charge isn't information the teams have readily access to. They only know how much more or less charge they have than everyone else when this information is shown on the live TV feed, and this is a feature that will be applied to my new push-to-pass system. Ambiguity creates interesting events that wouldn't usually happen, so the more the merrier. I also want to get rid of a cost cap. Its intentions are good, but its application isn't. It has brought the brack marker teams closer to the frontrunners. However, the only team whose position and performance has drastically changed is Aston Martin, and although it creates closer gaps, it creates more chance for Noah's Ark type grids where teams stay stagnant because they can't spend big to fix their weak areas. Regardless of how much you try and limit the spending of teams like Ferrari, Red Bull and Mercedes, they don't just have more money, but also better staff. Lots of money without the right personnel works just as badly as having good staff who don't have the means to put their plans into action. Just look at Toyota for an example of the former, and the 3 new teams from 2010 and an example of the latter. The cream will always rise to the top, and trying to restrict money without restricting every other aspect of the teams won't work. So bin off the cost cap. I also want to lift the many restrictions on testing that we have nowadays. Now the cost cap is gone, lifting the ban on testing somewhat makes sense. Official 3-day FIA tests will be held 4 times throughout the year, in Fuji the week after the race at Suzuka, in Magny Court and Paul Ricard during the summer break, and in Jeddah after the end of the season. Teams are permitted to run unlimited non-FIA official testing sessions at any circuit not currently on the calendar or prospective calendar of the following year. Furthermore, teams may test on tracks on the calendar with limits placed on data collection. However, they may only field drivers who have limited single-seater experience. Drivers who have raced in F1, F2 or F3 in the past 5 years are not permitted to take part in these tests, and this is done in an attempt to convince teams to try out drivers from other series. Now let's get into the ins and outs of my prospective cars. Along with all of these changes to testing, I want to make the cars lighter and smaller. I understand the FIA's push for stronger crash structures means the cars have more bulk to them, but 800 kilograms or 1,759 pounds for the Americans, it is way too heavy. With the complex ERS system being dropped, in my system the teams will have to drop to 750 kilograms for 2024 and 700 kilograms for 2026. The reason the reduction is staggered is because 2026 coincides with the new engine regulations, and I want to ditch the turbo hybrid engines and replace them with a formula that allows more freedom. Furthermore, we will change to a set of car regulations where the cars must have a track width no wider than 1.8 metres, a wheelbase no longer than 3.5 metres, a total car length no longer than 5 metres, and a height no taller than 1 metre. These are similar regulations to the 2016 era of Formula 1 cars with narrow wings but having the turbo hybrid engines. Speaking of engines, teams will be allowed either a 3.5 litre naturally aspirated engine or a 2 litre turbocharged one, and they can only be powered with sustainable fuels. The engines and the cars themselves will be required to pass fuel efficiency and emissions tests in all engine modes in order to be homologated, and this will help push sustainable fuel technology forward, while the likes of Formula E and WEC focus on electrical energy, as, especially in WEC, longer races means more real-life applications for the electrical technology. Another technical change for 2026 will be that cars can have a maximum of 6 forward gears and 1 reverse gear, and gear ratios can be selected from one of 2 presets selected by the gearbox manufacturer at the start of the season. This will allow teams to prioritise certain races over others. So for example, a backmarket team with no aspirations of scoring points could set up one set of ratios for either an ultra high or ultra low speed circuit and be better prepared than the big teams who will have to have 2 generic settings. The crash test will also be made harder to pass, so that minor incidents and small contact between drivers will not cause a car to become easily damaged. Minimum front and rear wing angles will be introduced to any circuit that is deemed to be reliant on straight line speed in order to increase overtaking and reduce the chance of trains forming behind one car with no one in the train able to make a move. I have left aerodynamic regulation changes until last, as they can definitely influence the outcome of races and championships more than the others can. Firstly, designers will be given more freedom to explore new avenues of design. For example, although the sides of the front wing and its end plates must not stretch past the outside of the front tyres, and the wing must have no more than 2 main elements, nor sit higher than a horizontal line drawn through the centre of the front wheels, front wings will be under no design restrictions as long as the safety or the integrity of the wing itself is not compromised. It's a similar story for rear wings, however only 1 main top element is allowed, and teams will be allowed 2 horizontal elements to stable the wing's end plates. They may place these wherever they wish as long as they are attached to each side of the wing structure. Furthermore, the rear wing itself can only be attached to the car's bodywork and not to integral mechanical parts of the car such as gearboxes, which allows for faster repair times in the event of an accident. Barge boards are banned, and all other aerodynamic appendages are banned if they fall outside of the current 2023 regulations set. That's the cars talked about and finished, so let's get into the sporting regulations, where the fun begins. The first thing I want to discuss is the weekend format. Firstly, I believe that F1 drivers and teams get way too much track time to collect data and acclimatise to the track, and this makes races far more predictable than years gone by. So to curb this, I propose that instead of having 3 practice sessions across 2 days, only 1 practice session will be held on Friday morning with a length of 45 minutes. No one sensible watches practice anyway, apart from in the first race of the season, so you won't be missing anything. Some may worry, what will happen if this one session is wet and teams can't gather enough data? But in my opinion, this will only improve the show, as it would increase ambiguity and also maybe force the teams to run in conditions they otherwise wouldn't running, in order to give them at least some data, especially if it's a completely new track that they're running at. The next point of contention is sprint races. I'm actually not against sprint races if the FIA actually get them to do their purpose, which is condensing the action of the main race into a tighter space to increase wheel-to-wheel action. However, in its current format, the sprint system is not fit for purpose. Firstly, I would bin off sprint qualifying. It's not a bad idea, but it adds needless running to what is supposed to be a quick-fire session. Next, I want to create a tyre that can be pushed flat out for a short race distance of 100 kilometres. So F1's sole tyre supplier must make a sprint-only tyre compound for this purpose. Next, I want to properly spice up the action, so drivers will have to line up for the sprint in reverse championship order. Championship points will not be awarded for finishing positions. Well, not exactly for finishing positions. Any driver who starts outside of the top half of the field, the top 10 in a 20-car grid, in the sprint, will get 1 bonus championship point for every position they gain during the sprint, with a points bonus cap of 10. Any driver inside the top 10 at the end of the sprint will gain points from 10th for first down to 1 for 10th. So let's say Max Verstappen starts 20th in this format and somehow finishes first. He would not only get 10 points for winning, but 10 bonus points for overtaking 10 cars in the field, totaling 20. For those worrying this number is perilously close to the points for winning the main race, don't worry because I'll get onto that in a bit. This sprint system invites fighting all across the field. Also, This session will be held on Saturday after regular qualifying for the main race, so drivers can worry less about damaging their car as there are no more sessions for that day. This system also gives slower cars and drivers a fighting chance at points and lets them show off their defensive capabilities they wouldn't usually have to. It would be great to see the faster cars attempt to fight their way through a slower pack, especially as they can be pushed hard throughout. And realistically, everyone has points to fight for, from the first place starter to the 10th place starter to the 20th place starter. Also, as there is more chance of bumping and barging and there isn't a cost cap anymore, teams may prepare a T car or third car from which they may take parts from during the weekend or use in the event of one of the main cars becoming terminally damaged. This T car is only subject to parc ferme after the end of a sprint, unlike the two main cars which are locked in after regular qualifying. Qualifying will change in terms of structure but not in terms of concept. To spice things up, halfway through the 15 minutes of the first qualifying session, as the clock hits 7:30 to go, all of the drivers from the teams in the top half of the Constructors' Championship, i.e. the top 5 teams in a 10-team grid, will be frozen, and their times cannot be improved on the timesheets, although they can still be on the track setting laps, they just won't count. This rule attempts to ensure all teams are challenged in the first session of qualifying and the big teams can't just cruise around unchallenged. Furthermore, to avoid situations like in the 2003 Brazilian Grand Prix qualifying, where back markers Minardi almost qualified 1-2 purely due to their runs being dry and everyone else's being in progressively wetter conditions, if the session is declared fully wet to begin with, but transitions to a phase where the track is deemed to be sufficiently dry, the freeze will be lifted on the faster teams, and this freeze can be lifted at any time due to weather. That is qualifying 1. The bottom half of the order is knocked out and the top 7 get a 7-minute session to battle it out of a pole position with no gimmicks. People might scoff at the changes to the qualifying system, pointing out that changes such as aggregate qualifying or the 2016 elimination format failed miserably. However, those systems failed because the FIA hadn't considered major flaws or loopholes that could affect its intended outcomes. I don't think the system would fall to that fate. However, if it were to do so and it was boring or confusing or it just didn't work, I would revert to the 2023 regular qualifying format. The next session is obviously the main race on Sunday, or late Saturday night if you're in Vegas, and there will be some changes here. The race distance will remain 305 km for most tracks and 260 km for Monaco, and drivers will be required to make at least one pit stop, although teams may use just hards or only softs to complete a race distance if they please. Moreover, since the cars are supposed to be better for wheel-to-wheel racing, they won't require tyre trickery to make overtaking happen like we've seen in the last decade and a bit. There will only be 2 dry tyre compounds in this format, soft and hard. Nice and simple. Pirelli, or whichever other tyre manufacturers we get in Formula 1, will be advised to make the harder tyre last approximately half the race, while the softer tyre may go anywhere from around a quarter to a third race distance. The softs will be designed with each and every track in mind to be quick enough to recover the pit stop deficit without being under or overpowered. Pirelli may adapt to softs and hards throughout the season without disclosing this to the teams, meaning teams may go into a race weekend without knowing whether a 1, a 2, or even a 3 stop will be most efficient. However, despite the ambiguity in the tyres by Pirelli or whichever manufacturer we use, safety and tyre integrity will be guaranteed as long as sensible precaution is taken, i.e. there will be no sudden losses of pressure in the tyres. In the wet, it'll be very simple too. As to save tyres flown to each race, there will be just one standard wet tyre compound. This will cover anything from intermediate rain to the harshest conditions F1 can safely face. Wet races will only be stopped or delayed in the event where visibility is severely reduced due to spray or if aquaplaning occurs. The lighter and smaller cars should produce less spray and thus allow races in wetter conditions than we see in modern times. Lastly in this section, I'll talk about component allocation. Teams will be allowed 5 of each major engine component along with 5 gearboxes. This intends to mitigate needless penalties. Furthermore, you cannot take more than 1 new component per weekend, which stops drivers trying to make the best of a bad situation by taking an entirely new engine and gearbox instead of the one component which they'd exceeded their allowance of. Now we've talked about the racing on paper, let's get into the on-track stuff. The FIA have come under scrutiny recently for their inability to be consistent in their verdicts on seemingly similar incidents. To shed some light on this, any incident with recent precedent that hasn't caused a change to the sporting code will be treated the same as that recent incident in my system. The following criteria follow for on-track incidents. No significant time loss and no damage for either driver equals no further action. Minimal time loss for the non-guilty party / less guilty party equals 5-second time penalty for the guilty / more guilty party. Damage that doesn't require a pit stop for the non-guilty / less guilty driver is a reprimand and a 5-second time penalty for the more guilty or guilty driver. Damage that does require a pit stop for the non-guilty/less guilty driver is a drive-through penalty for the guilty/more guilty driver, or add the pit lane time loss to their race time if the penalty must be applied post-race. Taking another non-guilty/less guilty driver out of a race or out of reasonable contention is a 10-second stop-going penalty for the guilty/more guilty driver. Intentional retribution acts or otherwise intentional crashes is a disqualification from the event for the guilty driver and potential action against the team if it was conspired. If the intentional action immediately affects the outcome of a championship, then the driver and potentially the team will be disqualified from their respective championships. All incidents below a drive-through penalty will garner 1 penalty point on the super licence. A drive-through or a 10-second stop-go will garner 2 penalty points. Intentional malice will result in a withdrawal or temporary suspension of a driver's super licence. This system intends to be a nice and simple one, where human error from stewards is mitigated. However, we still need humans to judge incidents. Drivers do not need to be sufficiently alongside going into a corner if they can make it out the other side of the corner without forcing their competitor off track with all 4 wheels. Conversely, defending drivers cannot make moves that push their competitor wide, and changing your line under braking is illegal. Drivers will be given leeway in most situations where no significant contact is made, however dangerous moves may still be noted. All FIA stewards must have driven in Formula 1 in the last 30 years or have won an F1 race, and all must have passed the standardisation test. Representatives from each race's host country that currently exists in F1 will be scrapped as they may be biased towards home drivers or home interest. The race director Niels Wittich will act as a one-way liaison between teams, drivers and the stewards and cannot make any decisions himself, nor can he override the stewards' verdict on penalties. 3 main stewards will be selected per event, and the stewards are limited to 3 events each per season, unless in emergencies where the limits must be exceeded. So now we know what cars are going to be driven, thanks to my own technical regulations. We know how they'll be driven, thanks to the sporting regulations and stewarding systems. Now let's get into where they're going to be driven. Unlike the real FIA, I'm going to actually properly group races based on location, rather than doing it half-assed like they did. Also, we don't need more than 18 to 20 races per season. Not only are extra races more miles and more stress on the personnel, it takes away from the prestige of the sport if there's a race on pretty much every single week, or other week in the year outside of summer and winter. I'm also not going to restrict any countries or tracks from hosting races. I know some would like to see races in countries with bad human rights records go off the calendar. However, F1 has never really been fighting for such causes. They raced in the United States while segregation was still federally legal, and in South Africa during apartheid. Now, I'm not trying to justify racing in those places, but in my opinion, it's best to race in those countries that have morally corrupt laws and be brutally honest while we're doing this. If we've got wet wipe Domenicali talking about trying to spur social change and change laws on LGBT rights and rights for women by bringing F1 to Saudi Arabia, it's not going to do jack shit. But if the FIA were to be brutally honest and confirm they're only racing there because of a huge paycheck, not only would the fans appreciate the honesty, but these nations might not want to race in F1 to begin with, and therefore F1 actively works against sports washing. Despite me fence-sitting on the issues with the modern calendar, while I would like to go balls out with it, I'm going to try and keep it semi-realistic. So here we go. As this isn't just for 2024, but for F1 in the future in general, I won't mention dates or weekends. I'll just remember rough timescales where necessary and the tracks themselves. Round 1 is in early March in Albert Park, Melbourne. Adelaide could only come back if the track was made longer and if they got hold of a contract to hold a race that currently extends to 2035 that Melbourne has. Next, I'd say go to Malaysia in Sepang for the first time since 2017, then China at the Shanghai International Circuit, and then Japan at Suzuka, and Singapore will be done before the start of May. A nice little Asia stretch there. Look at that, FIA. Grouping races. Eurasian stopovers in Azerbaijani Baku and Turkey in Istanbul follow before the European season kicks off at the Hungaroring as we transition into June. Then it's the Red Bull Ring and Hockenheim, then the Dutch race in Assen, not Zandvoort, before Spa, Monza, Monaco and Silverstone complete a quintessential quartet of F1 history just before the summer break, which comes after the race at the European Grand Prix, whose location and venue will be selected by fan and driver vote. This event will spill into August. A race in Canada will be held in early September, then in the United States at COTA before going down south for the Brazilian Grand Prix in October. Then in this reality, Saudi Arabia has put down a huge wad of cash every year to host the finale. Money which will go to fund grassroots development programs for drivers from underrepresented groups such as women and funds less well-off venues like Hockenheim. it's very much a give and take situation in that regard, although gay sex is banned in Saudi Arabia, so maybe don't use the phrase give and take too literally over there. And that's a calendar that's ruthlessly efficient on mileage and grouping until you get to Jeddah, and all in 20 races. I have had to break tradition by putting Monaco in July and after Spa and Monza, which does feel very weird to me. And there are a lot of changes, but I think if we have this narrative that you can't have certain races in certain months, then you're just going to get roadblocks and you're just going to get little things that you're going to have to work an entire calendar around one or two races, which is very annoying. So I've just gone bin off history, and yes, it's very annoying because it's not going with tradition having Monaco in May, but screw it, Also, I've changed the race in Netherlands to Assen instead of Zandvoort because Assen is way better for overtaking, and I've heard that it's a much better track. You can tell me what you think about that in the comments, but I just prefer it in general. I've seen it, and a lot of people who actually know what they're talking about say that Assen is better. Anyway, I'm literally not even talking on the script here, so I'm going to get back to my script because you probably think, what is this guy waffling about? But yeah, I just wanted to give the middle finger to the real life FIA, who keep their word as well as Nelson Piquet Jr. does. With the calendar done, we know what the cars will look like, how the races will look like, and how they'll be regulated, and where and roughly when races will be held. Now, the only one of the 5 Ws remaining is who. And we've already discussed how FIA and stewarding personnel will be selected, but this one focuses more on the drivers. Many have criticised the current system of super licence points that doesn't reward good drivers in non-European junior series, nor does it exclude incompetent drivers who are just there due to the money. Therefore, I propose a new super licence system. Firstly, all super licence holders must be 17 or older. I've said 17 instead of 18 because although Max Verstappen was error-prone in his early career, he matured quickly and most drivers do the same. Secondly, they must hold a full, valid driving licence in any country. They must also pass a theory-based test on relevant safety, general driving and sporting regulation topics in Formulaone. The next part is I am binning off the super licence point system because there are certain combinations of series where a driver can acquire enough points in the current system without having stepped foot in a single-seater open-wheeled car. If you have achieved a top 4 finish in the Drivers' Championship in Formula 2 in the previous 5 seasons, then you'll be eligible for a super licence. The winner of Formula 3 will also be eligible for a super licence under the same terms. The main criticism of the super licence point system is it undervalues series like IndyCar, where the driving talent there, in my opinion, can supersede the talent in F2. Therefore, the top 5 in the IndyCar series from the past 5 years will also be eligible for a super licence, along with the Indy NXT Series champion. Sticking with open wheel formulas, the Super Formula top 4 in the championship from the past 5 years will be eligible for a super licence as well. Next, I will move into closed cockpit and/or non-open wheeled cars. Winners and runners-up of the WEC Series, the NASCAR Cup Series, DTM and V8 supercars will be eligible for a super licence. Some may point out that the difference between these types of cars and those seen in F1 would render these series drivers uncompetitive in Formula 1. However, we've seen several multifaceted drivers in F1 history who are/were a jack of all trades. And also, it's the F1 team's choice as to whether they take on one of these drivers. Also, similar to Peter Brook in his video, I would like to create a team specifically designed for driver development. Funding will come from the FIA and chassis will be built and updated by Dallara with customer engines from a manufacturer not currently in Formula 1. The F2 champion will be given a seat in this team if they do not accept an offer from any other team, and then the champions from all the series listed above will be allowed to participate in the end-of-season Jeddah test, along with having up to 6 days extra at testing in a Dallara spec chassis from the season prior. The champion, who is consistently the best over the course of this extended test, will be offered a seat in Formula 1 in the FIA-ran team. This may sound a bit radical, however, in my opinion, it will diversify the grid and make it clear that you don't have to follow the FIA's ladder to F1 in order to make it there if you don't want to or can't. Friday practice driver regulations are much more relaxed as they still need to be 17, have a valid driver licence and pass a theory test on F1 knowledge and rules. However, they only have to have placed in the top 10 in the standings in any series listed above in the past 7 seasons, or currently be inside the top 10 of one of those series at the point of their confirmation. Friday practice drivers will be less prevalent anyway, as teams aren't likely to have an unknown or inexperienced driver in their car in their only data gathering session of each weekend. So, we've gone through the drivers, stewards, the cars, and the calendar, but I want to quickly talk about the teams. The 11th team ran by Dallara will be partnered by the Andretti Cadillac entry, increasing the team count to 12. A 13th team will be permitted entry given they can provide €100 million upfront payment, and they must expand F1's reach or market value in a specific area of the world, whichever one they may choose. They may become either a customer or a works team. However, new works teams may receive financial benefits to encourage more manufacturers to join Formula One. And so now, this video has now covered drivers, teams, calendar, cars, and the FIA, but I do want to touch on the point system and prize system. Obviously, I mentioned earlier how sprint points would work, but let's discuss the whole weekend. Firstly, I'm offering a singular point to the driver who attains pole position in the regular qualifying session. Then obviously, in the sprint, like I said earlier, it's points from 10 to 1 for the top 10 and bonus points for each position the driver starting in the back of the pack gained during the sprint. Now let's get into the race points format. With up to 20 points available in the sprint, there will be a change to the points for the regular race. Right now in real life F1, as sprints are a third of normal race distance, it makes sense that the points it offers are roughly a third of the main race too. I'll keep to this type of format for my system. Also, in years gone by, the point systems have expanded and opened up to offer points to lower positions. However, with massively increased reliability and drivability of the cars, this trend hasn't followed the trend of the point system. Therefore, I want to radically extend the point system to the top 20 drivers, meaning there'll be positions to fight for all over the field. The point system will go like this: 20th, 1 point; 19th, 2 points; 18th, 3 points; 17th, 4 points; 16th, 5 points; 15th, 6 points; 14th, 8 points; 13th, 10 points; 12th, 12 points; 11th, 14 points; 10th, 16 points; 9th, 18 points; 8th, 20 points; 7th, 25 points; 6th, 30 points; 5th, 35 points; 4th, 40 points; 3rd, 45 points; 2nd, 50 points; and 1st will get 60 points. This system rewards consistency in finishing races, along with providing battles up and down the field. Some say that this change will completely devalue the points tallies of drivers from yesteryear. However, that damage has already been done by the 2010 to 2018 point system that's more than doubled points from a win to what it was in the 50s. But the main difference is the number of races. Regardless of the point system, if you're doing 3 times as many races in a season that you used to, obviously there's going to be major discrepancies in the points charts. This system brings F1 into the future where everyone is fighting for something. The point system of decades ago served their purpose back then, and this one will serve its purpose in this era. I'm going to move on to prize money now. Prize money should be distributed from a pot of €1.2 billion like this in a 12-car grid. 12th, €0. 11th, €50 million. 10th, €55 million. 9th, €65 million. 8th, €75 million. 7th, €90 million. 6th, €100 million. 5th, €110 million. 4th, €130 million. 3rd, €150 million. 2nd, €175 million. And 1st will get €200 million prize money. The next section I'm going to do is presentation and representation. Basically, how should F1 present the sport? Firstly, I'm going to talk about in-race attendance. I'm not going to place caps on how expensive race tickets will be because the tracks need to have a sustainable source of income that they control. Furthermore, celebrity attendance will be encouraged, and although they don't have to know anything about the sport to attend, it is strongly advised that they at least have a basic knowledge of what's happening in the sport at that given time. If approached by reporters on grid walks, they may decline interviews, however they must do so politely and calmly. And they are not allowed any personal security on the grid. Track security will not be allowed to interfere with the actions of team members, reporters or senior F1 figures of the grid unless there is an imminent security risk. This is to be put in place after Jackie Stewart was challenged by security at the Miami Grand Prix this year. Furthermore, in the actual broadcasting of a race, unnecessary camera shots of the crowd will be banned on the world feed, although amplified crowd noise will be encouraged. On-track battles and mechanical problems for drivers will be cut to immediately on the live TV feed as they happen, reducing the need for countless replays after the fact. Replays themselves will be limited to important displays of things the viewer wouldn't usually see. For example, a slow-mo zoomed-in replay of one of the leaders whose tyres are graining. For the TV audiences themselves, exclusive right deals for countries or regions will be banned. And there'll be both live free-to-air options in all regions and paid live viewing options in most regions. F1 alienated a lot of its working class following in the UK when Sky acquired its exclusive rights deal because most can't justify spending ridiculous money on TV just to watch Formula One. Enticing back a core viewership base instead of chasing the money will do F1's reputation a lot of good in the long run. To talk about the representation part of presentation and representation, teams and all other companies involved with Formula One may not discriminate against any employees or prospective employees regardless of race, gender, sexual orientation, disabilities or anything else that people can be discriminated against. Furthermore, the F1 Academy is getting binned off. It's meant to help women and girls get out of kart racing and into car racing as a way to bridge the gap between karts and cars, but all it does is add a needless step to the racing ladder for female drivers. And furthermore, even if you are successful in F1 Academy, that's not a good indicator of your ability. Any sensible prospective F1 team will want to see prospective drivers' performances on a level playing field. If a driver comes from F1 Academy, having never driven against men in cars, the teams will have to go back to their karting careers to see representative performances against men. Not because they're men, but because at the moment, men make up the majority of fast junior drivers. Adding F1 Academy to a female driver's CV is patronising and pointless. It doesn't matter if they prove themselves against other women because everyone will rightly need to see results against men to judge their ability. The money saved from not running F1 Academy will go into grassroots programmes attempting to get young girls into cars at the same age and capacity as their male counterparts. F1 needs what Michelle Mouton was to the WRC, or what Danica Patrick was to IndyCar, and no, Jamie Chadwick is not on the same level as Michelle Mouton. Furthermore, branching out of representation, if drivers wish to make political or otherwise statements during a race weekend, they may not be stopped from doing so, and race host nations may not attempt to do the same. If you don't want people talking about your human rights issues, maybe don't have human rights issues. Some people may be against mixing politics and sport, but they are already intrinsically linked. Some older people, especially Brits of a certain age, will talk about how they grew up in an era of F1 where politics weren't a thing, and how James Hunt and Niki Lauda won all their championships and races without talking about any gay rights. But to use those two examples, James Hunt vehemently opposed himself to the apartheid regime in South Africa, and during his time as a commentator for the BBC, he publicly trashed apartheid on live TV without having to be prompted. Niki Lauda was the same. He defiantly opposed governing body wrangling and wouldn't let FISA, VOCA or the FIA get a leg up on any of the drivers. Furthermore, he was the only person to step up to Boeing, one of the most powerful companies in the world at the time, when he owned his airline company, after a crash on one of his commercial planes brought into question the safety of the aircraft. So yeah, the drivers of yesteryear were completely apolitical and were just drivers and nothing else. Freedom of speech is an essential right the drivers need. They are professional athletes who have a platform they can use how they please. If the FIA want to restrict that, they can politely fuck off. Yes, I'm talking to you, Ben Sulayem. Just like how we look back fondly at James Hunt's defiance to apartheid and Niki Lauda's defiance to incompetent or lazy people in authority, I bet you in 50 years' time we'll look back fondly at Lewis Hamilton's rainbow helmet paint and Sebastian Vettel's climate change activism. Opinions change over time, and acting like the general population's outlook on life won't have changed in 50 years is utterly stupid. Anyways, that's my little rant over. Back to the F1 stuff. To be honest, I don't think there's anything much else to talk about to make F1 great again. So, I guess it's time to end the video. Tell me in the comments what I said that was right and what I said that was wrong. And I'll see you all later. Bye.